All right, let's talk about RPE and when you should either undershoot, be on the money, or you should overshoot. And within your training, there is a time for all of these things that's going to lead you to better results. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about when to do each, when it's applicable, and when it's not. So starting off, giving context, the way I program is within 4-week blocks, sometimes 5-week blocks, and for most of my sessions, you're going to be starting at a lower RPE, and by the end of the block, you're going to be working to a higher RPE. Now, some sessions may keep a more static RPE approach throughout the block, but as far as primary days and secondary days, they're going to tend to be increasing as we go. So as we get into describing RPEs for squat and deadlift, let's talk about this primary day first, and then afterwards, I will talk about how we should approach our secondary squat and deadlift RPEs. Now, starting with squat and deadlift, because the way that we're approaching them as far as progressions, primaries and secondaries are fairly similar. So we'll go into the use case for RPE there, and then afterwards we'll go into bench and how I would recommend we approach RPE. So with RPE on squat and deadlift, I like to, for primary day, I would start the block somewhere RP 5 to 6, and then the week 2 we'd go RP 6 or 7, week 3 we would go 7 or 8, and then week 4 we would go RP 9 or 10. Typically earlier in the macro cycle, my progression is going to look like 5, 6, 7, 8. And then at the end, for the singles block, we would go 5, 6, 7, 9. Some lifters may need to start a little bit heavier because for whatever reason they are not as strong, or maybe they just need to push RP in order for their top end to feel better, and we would go 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, when should we undershoot? When should we be on the money? And when should we overshoot, if we even should? Got baby over there. Week 1 and week 2. I tend to say these are good weeks to be a little bit out on the side of undershooting. So if you have an RP 5 single on week 1, I would say it would probably be smarter for you to have that end up being at maybe RP 4, 4.5, as opposed to you hitting an RP 5, 5.5, closer to 6. And that's because within the way I program, your week 4 is going to be very challenging. You're going to hit a very heavy set on your primary day for squat and deadlift, and then you're probably going to hit a very heavy set on your secondary day, depending on who you are. Additionally, you should be pushing your accessories very hard. So on that week 4, we're going to be hitting PRs on various accessory work, and as a result, there's going to be fatigue. And my week 1s act as a deload, not in the sense where we pull back sets and we pull back reps, but we deload intensity. So the top sets get easier, the back downs get easier, and the accessory work is at a lower RPE. So we deload in that way, and then we work our way back over the course of the block. So on week 1, you should be operating under a decent amount of fatigue, and due to that, we want to take things easier. So if you're really beat up on your week 1, it just makes sense for you to undershoot it a bit. Same with your accessory work. If you've got a really challenging movement that tends to be more fatiguing, let's say something like a hack squat or a barbell RDL, and I have it programmed at RP 8 or 2 RIR on week 1, maybe it would be smart for you to undershoot and go a little lighter if you're really beat up. Now, if you're recovered and you come into that week 1 feeling great, sure, be on the money with the RPE. Definitely don't overshoot, but you could push it, more to the desired RPE. But if you're beat up, it makes sense to undershoot, auto-regulate, because it's going to be hard for your coach at every given moment to say, okay, so we're a little more beat up this end of the block, so next block we're actually going to start at RP 3. You need to get to a point where you can understand your body and auto-regulate and know when to go lighter and when it makes sense. So I would say on week 1, right when you feel beat up, undershoot. Now, moving on to week 2, this can be more of the same, though we're going to tend to want to be more on the money with RPE. Fatigue should have dissipated from week 1 by taking things easier. But if fatigue is still present, and let's say your top set single is at RP 6 on your primary day, it would make sense to be a little undershot. Maybe instead of undershooting by 1 RP on the week 1, you would undershoot by half an RP on week 2. So you tend to be a little bit less conservative on that week 2 compared to week 1, but still definitely don't want to be overshooting our primary day week 2 squat and deadlift. Moving on to the week 3, I would say this would be a better time to be on the money than undershoot. We're at a point where we're approaching the end of the block, and we want to hit a weight that is a high enough intensity to have us feeling ready for our week 4 primary day. So sometimes, many cases, a client actually needs to touch heavy weight on week 3 to feel strong on the week 4. So we don't want to be undershooting and going still super light on our week 3 if we need that intensity to carry us to the week 4. So week 3, I tell my clients on primary squat and deadlift, that's where you want to be on the money with your RPE. Try to hit it on the head. If it's RPE 7, have that set be exactly at 7. Now, week 4, this is where we have some fun. This is where we're pushing some heavy top sets. And I would say this is the time to, not undershoot. You don't want to come in and, you've saved yourself weeks 1 through 3 to hit a really big weight on week 4. I would say you probably shouldn't undershoot. For my clients, the way I program on their week 4s is I give them a range. So, you're going to have a low end of the range and a top end of the range. It could range anywhere from 10 pounds difference to 20 pounds. And you want to be within that. And even for me, if I give you, let's say 500 pounds is the top end of your range, and that weight is going to be undershot, I don't want you going above the range because I carefully laid out the weight progression in that block. So if you're one of my clients, obviously ask me if you can go above it. I prefer that. I don't want you overshooting because I have a plan for you in mind. So if there's a range there, stay within the range. But if you don't have a range and you're doing your own training and you're on your own, the week 4 would be a good time to ball out, have some fun, because you're gonna have another 3 weeks to build back up. So that would really be the only instance where I would say a slight overshoot is okay and is understandable because it's the end of your block and you're trying to hit something big. So that covers weeks 1 through 4 on your primary squat and deadlift. So now that we've covered the primary day, let's go into the secondary day and how you should approach RPE throughout the block. Now, similar to the primary day, week 1, we would probably want to undershoot a little bit. For me, my progression on secondary days for lifters would be something more like 4, 5, 6, maybe RP 8 on week 4, or RP 5, 6, 7, RP 8 or 9 on the week 4. So it's typically either going to follow the exact RPE as the primary day, or maybe 1 RP behind if we need a little bit better recovery. So week 1, if you're still really beat up, I would undershoot and I wouldn't push it super hard. Week 2, still if you're feeling beat up, I would undershoot, but maybe not as much as you did on the week 1. Week 3, I would still try to be on the money, but still, in some cases, I would say it would make sense to not be too aggressive on this week 3, because the way I program, if your primary day on week 4, right, or in general, starts the week and you have your week 3 secondary before the primary day, you don't want that week 3 secondary squat and deadlift to be super hard, that it's beating you up for your week 4 primary. So I would say still make sure you're being intentional about the weight you're taking and you're not going too heavy on that week 3 secondary. So make sure you're not going too hard on that week 3 secondary day to where it's going to interfere with your week 4 primary. And now that we finished the week 3, let's talk about week 4. All right, so with the week 4 secondary day, we would want to ball out. This would be a time where we would maybe want to overshoot or be, right on the money with RP. Now, it depends on where your week 4 secondary takes place within the week. If you're in my style of programming where we try to have the primary day start the week and then your secondary day come after the primary, it would make sense then to push it because we've already hit our heaviest exertion, heaviest intensity day on the primary day, and we can end the block heavy. Now, if your week 4 primary comes after, and it's the second session of the week and your secondary comes first, you probably don't want to push that week 4 secondary really hard because you don't want it to fatigue you coming into the week 4 primary. So that would be an instance where you would want to be on the money with RPE and making sure you're not overshooting. Because what good does it do you to overshoot your week 4 secondary and then come in on your week 4 primary beat up? We want to be strong in the primary, so don't do that. So depending on where it's structured in the week would dictate how hard you push that secondary. Now let's go into the bench press and how we should approach things. Are you benching 2 times a week? Are you benching 3 times, 4 times? I don't coach anyone benching 5 times. And I think for the sake of my audience, most of you guys aren't either, so I'm not gonna go into that. We'll just cover 2, 3, and 4 days a week and how you should approach your RPE within that. So starting at 2 days a week, not a whole lot of people bench 2 days a week, but I still think it's applicable here. You have a primary and secondary day, being that you don't have as many bench sessions, you can probably push things harder in general. So I would start blocks at a higher RPE in this instance. So it would look something like 6, 7, 8, 9, or 7, 7, 8, 9, and we would follow that approach for both the primary and secondary day just because you have so much rest and bench recovers. So we'd push it a bit harder. I would say on the week 1, you'd probably want to be on the money, if not a little bit undershot. Week 2 on the money, week 3 on the money, and then week 4 on the money, if not a little bit overshot. So bench is a lift that we're going to want to push harder because for most people, they can just recover better from it. It's not as fatiguing as squat and deadlift. And we don't want to undershoot a whole lot because that can tend to leaving bench feeling understimulated and not as strong. So within that 2-day week layout, we're going to push it a bit harder. We're not going to undershoot as much, and we're going to try to be a little more greedy with the weight that we're taking. Now, moving on to a 3-day week layout. This is where things can get more nuanced depending on how we structure the week and what days we're going to want to push. And I'm not going to cover every single, permutation of a bench layout. I'm just going to cover the basic ones. So for me, I tend to have my go-to layout be the primary day starts the week, then comes the secondary day, then comes the tertiary day. And my primary day would, let's say, be on a Saturday, then my secondary day would be on a Monday, and then my tertiary day, depending on the lifter, would either be on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on if they need more recovery going to their primary or less recovery to feel primed. So this is context dependent. But the way I'm approaching RPE, and I'll cover primary day now, is we don't really ever want to be undershooting because the primary day particularly is a day we want to have a lot of intensity for pretty much all lifters. The only case I would have them undershoot the week 1 is if there's someone that gets really beat up by bench. So in that case, it makes more sense to not push things as hard, but for the rest of my lifters, they're probably going to want to have a bit more intensity and push things a bit harder. So week 1, we want to be on the money. Week 2, we also want to be on the money. Week 3, we also want to be on the money with RPE and try to hit it exactly. If not, it may not be end of the world if we overshoot it by half an RPE. And then on the week 4, where we go heaviest on the primary day, that's where we're going to be on the money, maybe overshoot a little bit, try to hit something good on that primary day. Now, secondary days within a 3-day week structure for this lifter where it's primary, secondary, tertiary, we would want to push that secondary day pretty hard. I find that in the same way with the primary day, lifters tend to need intensity on their bench press to feel strong throughout their training. So that's secondary RPE. If we're going RPE 5, 6, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, depending on what I do for you, we're going to want to be on the money with that RPE. So on that secondary day, like I said, we want to be on the money with RPE, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 6, 7, 8, 9 for our progression. And, weeks 1 through 4, we can really just be on the money with it because it comes after our primary and we have enough recovery because it's on Monday before we get to Saturday. So we've got all that recovery, and this session can be pushed pretty hard. So moving on to our tertiary day within this layout, this is really lifter dependent. If you're someone that really still needs more intensity to perform well on your primary day, we would want to be intentional about pushing this session. I would tend to go 5, 6, 7, 8, or 6, 7, 8, 9 as well on my RP progression for this day to ensure that, the heavy top set, which tends to be a single on this day, would prime them coming to the primary. So we really don't want to be undershooting, going too light. If it does tend to beat up the lifter, then we would want to go a little bit lighter and maybe be on the money or even undershoot it a bit to allow for them to feel better. But this tends to be a day when they need the stimulus and it's on that Thursday and it's close to the primary, we would want to be pushing it a bit harder. Now, if it's on Wednesday and it's a bit earlier in the week, it could also be pushed harder because they have more recovery going to the primary, or it's still, we might maybe want to undershoot or be a little easier on that day to allow for recovery going to the primary day. You're benching 3 days a week, so recovery should still be, not much of an issue, but depending on the lifter, if you get beat up, we would want to go in order of pushing the primary day the hardest and always starting there. Then if we want to add intensity, we can push the secondary day harder, and then lastly, we would go and push that tertiary day harder to get them ready for the primary. But, it's good to have a structure in the way we approach it. Now, one other layout I could go with would be where the primary day comes at the end of the week, and it would go something like, secondary, tertiary, primary, and the only difference with that layout would be on the week 4 going into the primary day. You probably wouldn't want to push that secondary and tertiary super hard, more be on the money with RPE, because you don't want to be too beat up going into that final primary session. So obviously there's many different layouts you could do 3 days a week. I'm not going to go into all of them. Just the key is if you have sessions coming before your primary on that week 4, you probably don't want to overshoot them or go too hard because you don't want fatigue to be involved. But if your primary day starts the week and those secondary, tertiary sessions come afterwards, weeks 1 through 3, keep them in check. That way you're not beating yourself up going to the week 4. And then on that week 4, secondary, tertiary, depending on how it's structured, you can push it a little harder, maybe overshoot because your heaviest exertion, week 4 primary, is already done. So moving into a 4-day week bench structure, there is so many different possibilities about the way you could lay it out. And I'm not going to go into them because this video is just talking about RPE, but some of the basic ones that I do with my clients and then how I'm going to address them would be still primary day starting the week, and then we have our secondary day, and then either our lightest quaternary day comes after the secondary, and then we have a tertiary, or that quaternary day could come after the tertiary, and it's actually the 4th day of the week. It's not of the biggest importance. I'm just going to talk about how we would want to structure each of those days with RPE and how we would approach it. So with the primary day coming first, it's following the same exact rules that I talked about in 2 days a week or 3 days a week where we're pushing it hard. Same thing with the secondary day. We're still going to be pushing this hard because if you're benching 4 days a week, you probably need a good bit of intensity. That's why you're benching so many times. But the nuance comes in of how we incorporate that quaternary day. So if you're someone where you still need more intensity, we're probably not going to be adding singles on this session because you already have them on your primary and your tertiary. But we may want to have a top set. And if we have a top set on this quaternary day, I would start off by being, undershooting, going a little lighter, not pushing it too hard because you already have intensity on the primary, secondary, tertiary day. And I would take that 4th day, a little easier. But if we notice you're someone that needs a bit more intensity, as we work our way through the 4-day week bench structure, you would probably want to start being on the money with that top set each session. That way you can have that intensity that's just going to bring your overall bench training up. So I would start a little bit undershot weeks 1 through 4 on that day. And if you need more, eventually we can take it a little bit harder, but it's following the same structure as we would with the 3-day week layout, but we're just adding a 4th bench day in there and we're starting easier and we maybe want to make it a little bit harder as we go. Now, some additional considerations with a 4-week bench layout and how we push that day, it can be dependent on where that 4th day is. So if our primary day is Saturday and then our secondary day is Monday, maybe we have that quaternary day the day after our secondary, and if it's coming exactly after our secondary day, we're probably going to be pretty beat up from our secondary because we've got a heavy session along with all of the secondary day pressing accessories. We're probably going to feel beat coming into this bench day that comes the very next day. So in that instance, it's going to be a session where I'm probably always going to keep it lighter. I'm probably always going to tell the client to undershoot, not push it super hard because they're already fatigued. But if the day comes later where we have Saturday primary, secondary on Monday, and then we have Tuesday rest, and then Wednesday we have that quaternary, and then our tertiary is on Thursday, and we have that 4th bench day before the tertiary, then I would maybe push it a little harder because you have a day of rest between it and the secondary day. But still, I wouldn't want to push that session too hard because we have that tertiary day coming afterwards, and in most cases, for most people, this quaternary bench day, we're going to be undershooting and not pushing super hard. So this covers most of it. I'm not going to go exhaustive, like I said, into detail about all the different 4 bench day a week layouts that you can do, but this is the basic structure and approach I do with my clients for how should we approach RPE. Undershooting at times, being on the money at times, and then overshooting on those week 4s, primary days, secondary days, where we can get away with it. But that covers most of it. If you have any questions about how I approach it, let me know in the comments. I'd love to go back and forth. This is obviously, I think, a very basic approach to it. There's so many different, little ways you can go about it and tweak it and, be more nuanced. But I hope this is helpful, and thank you for following along. Hit that subscribe button wherever it is. If you don't, you hate me, and that's just mean. And leave the video a like if you found it helpful.